Good afternoon, welcome. Hello. Thank you for being here and for filling up, I don't just mean this room, but just generally Open Book. It's always my favourite time in the Cape Town calendar, Open Book Festival. I think it's, I was speaking to Mervyn on my radio show yesterday and saying that we really are blessed to have a festival that caters to us in the way that Open Book does, and with that it's all very well us coming up here and writing books and talking about them, but obviously without you coming and engaging, we are talking into the wind essentially. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you to our authors for being here and for writing their books. I'm going to just, because of time, every year I kind of go, all right, 1:45 we'll open up for questions. I'm going to open up a lot earlier because in my experience of doing this over the years, what tends to happen is you do that and then somebody has a question. You thought, well, here's what happens. You say anything about a question and everyone goes, no, I haven't got a question. And then I start talking and then somebody goes, well, I've got a question. And then it's 10-2. And then another person goes, I've got, and then 8 people. And then we run over and Mervyn threatens to be violent. So what we're going to do, he doesn't, he never would. What we're going to do is probably around 25:25, I'll do a check-in and see if anyone has got a question. And what I would love for this to be is less us up here going, oh, you've written a book, well done, and more a dialogue and a conversation, if that works for everybody. Welcome to our panellists and authors, Moshitadi Lehlomela, who has written quite simply an extraordinary book, The Girl Who Survived Her Mother, Navigating and Healing the Mother Wound, which is just thought-provoking and difficult and healing and helpful is how I would describe that book. Has anyone read any we're doing? Has anyone read? Can we get a no? Okay. Okay, good. And then Diane Awerbuck, who has written Inside Your Body, There Are Flowers, an extraordinary collection of short stories, which just kept me awake at night. More was what my brain was telling me, but also, whew, that is intense and beautiful. And Marina Auer, whose book Double Edged is also tough in parts. A completely different a move away. It's not memoir, obviously, it's fiction, but explores an awful lot that we're going to be discussing now. But yeah, I think that's it. I think there we are. I'm going to ask each of our authors to read from their books and to spark some thought, to give a context, a foundation. But before I do that, I just want to ask each of you to explain in your own words and not in the kind of my publisher's words, the what and the why of your books. Because often when we have to, write things and the blurb for our books, we're in mind, we are writing with you want to sell your book, and so you're writing, and it isn't, the what doesn't always marry with your what in your heart. So what's your what and your why of your book, Moshitadi?
For me, I think I would start with the why. I think it's just always been the crust of my work to speak about the mother wound, to write about it. And it was like, why not my story, right? Because when we write our stories, we give other people permission to tell their own stories. And in that way, we heal as a collective. And I think it just was in alignment with that work. So it became that why. And I think for the longest time, I wasn't thinking about sales. I was just like, I want it to be published. And I'm happy that it is, because I'm happy with the people in whose hands the book lands. I think it's the people that it was intended for, and that also fuels my own healing to say, hey, we're getting somewhere with this topic, and we can heal in the way that I would. You don't want to be the only one that's healing, because the world around you sort of doesn't make sense anymore. And when I speak about the mother wound and I write about it in the way that I did, which was vulnerable, and other people are becoming vulnerable and also healing, then I'm like, oh, my world is also becoming like what I envision, an ideal world to be. So, yeah.
And the what, just give people a synopsis.
What? In what sense?
What's your book about?
Well, my book is about my relationship with my mother. It's a memoir, and people would say to me, "Why are you writing a memoir at 33? What do you even know about life?" Right? And I'm like, this was a bit easier because it was specifically about my relationship with my mother, just from childhood to where I am now. I think if you were asking about general experiences, I probably don't have a lot of those, but with my relationship with my mother, that wound has been deep for a very long time, and therefore there was words there that gave birth to this book. So this book is about my relationship with my mother. It's about, well, the core of it is the mother wound, and just addressing that and what it can look like in everyday life, because people would say to you, well, she didn't lock you in a cage, so it's not that much of a big deal. This happened to everybody. So my what with this was just highlighting those sort of nuances that we don't talk about that are actually also very traumatic.
I think that's really interesting, though, and that really speaks to the topic of the subject of coming of age.
Yeah.
What could you possibly have? You've only 33. You haven't, people have lived lifetimes by the time they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. Diane, your what and your why?
So mine is a collection of short stories, and I think the further I get away from things that have happened in my life, the more clarity I have about them, but also how very odd they were at the time, especially things in families, and especially things that I experienced as a female person, as a child, and then as a teenager, and then as a young woman, and now as a approaching cronehood with joy, can I just say, because aging is a privilege and you should appreciate it. So that's the what, and the why is, so writing is a skill, right? You have an aptitude or a talent, and then you have an interest in honing that or pursuing it. So that's why. Publishers are the ones who really should be answering this question, because they think it will connect with others, because they are manifestos, because they will sell copies, because we are the change that we want. But also writing is fun. It is.
Marina, your what and your why?
What it is a pretty fast-paced female-led thriller. And why? Because those are not just the books that I enjoy reading, but I came to a point where I needed to write this character because the character idea came first. I've written other manuscripts where the seed of the idea was the setting or a scenario, but this character came to me first, a woman that was strong and in control. And in part, she was an antidote to that glut of protagonists that we had in the wake of Gone Girl and is it a girl on the train, or was it a woman on the train, or was it the drunk lady on the train? But you know those kind of protagonists that I'm talking about, and they all seem to be turning to the bottle or dragging themselves into senselessness, and you just thought, oh, stop drinking, stop drugging yourself, and sort your life out, because the story would have disappeared, the drama would have disappeared if they'd just taken control of themselves. So this protagonist is pretty much in control. And I needed to write that as an antidote to those kind of female characters that were being portrayed out there. So that was part of the spark. And then, just exploring the idea of control, and it's called double-edged, the double-edged sword that choice is, being so much in control, and then how that can affect you in life.
So the title of this discussion, Coming of Age, Vulnerabilities of Young Women, and 3 very different genres of writing, and it was fun to pick up on the theme in each of the books, and a real sort of compare and contrast. I'm going to ask you each just to read a little bit, just to kind of spur some thought, maybe for yourselves, but also for our audience, and also, of course, to give them an idea of your work in the books. And then we can maybe unpack a little bit what we mean by coming of age. Moshitadi, can you start?
Sure.
I'm not even going to ask them to contextualise where in the story. because you'll do that for yourself when you buy the books.
So I'm reading from chapter 5, Parentified. And I'm going to start from page 53. My hands had become full looking after Kagiso as my parents made it my responsibility to care for him. Bella tried to be there for me, to help me carry the load, but no child should have to parent another child. Over time, I lost her. I would hear her infectious love from inside the yard, but I was prohibited from joining her because who is going to take care of your brother if you go play? My grandmother, my namesake, Moshitadi, took care of my brother when I was at school, but the moment I came back home, it was my responsibility to feed, clothe, watch, and do the work of keeping him alive. Not only did Kagisho's arrival isolate me from my friends, it stole my childhood. The childhood I could have had. It solicited a kind of violence and inconsideration in both my parents, mostly my mother who lived with us full-time. My grades dropped, my confidence plummeted, and every bully in the school could sniff out how defeated I was already. Each one gunned for a pound of my flesh. Bullied at home, at school, and on the street, I went further into isolation. I immersed myself in every piece of literature I could find, old novels, old newspapers, and magazines. This is where my love for words was born and how I realized at age 9 that I wanted to be a writer. I wonder now if it was so I could give kids like myself a place to escape, like I needed to escape. When I couldn't find anything to read, my mind became the playground. I created a peaceful world where I had a resemblance of control. Unbeknownst to me, this was also a pivotal time of my life where I had become dissociated, as my therapist would later describe it. Existing in my body was war. It had become a battlefield for any adult experiencing frustration.
Thank you. Okay, so we're thinking of that in terms of coming of age and how that parentification might fall under one area of coming of age, or be a way in which one might be perceived as having come of age. Events outside our control, essentially. This is not a legal convention that says, and now you're an adult. It's not the physiology of the body. It's, we are putting this on you.
Yeah.
Diane, would you read for us?
Okay, I do need to contextualize this. Sorry.
Yes, you probably, okay, yeah.
My parents thought it was a good idea to put their 3 young daughters unaccompanied on the train from Kimberley to the Eastern Cape for the December holidays, and also, unbeknownst to us, it was the train that was taking all the young soldiers off to their base camp at Tempe, which is, it's a name that means paradise, kind of pastoral paradise. Until quite recently, I had been invisible. I still sucked my thumb. I still thought I could fly. There was a spot of grass just under my mother's washing line where I liked to stand, flanked by the moist patterned sheets and the transparent pillowcases. When I concentrated, when I sent the blood message to them, I could feel my feet humming with the small engines of liftoff. I held my arms out, straight as a crucifix, and I soared over West End, the cafe, the cemetery, the stonemason's house. I saw everyone, their brownish rooms and gravelly yards and potholed streets, and they could not see me. But then one of my father's friends, a faded man, except for a deep red V tanned into the skin of his chest, noticed me. He used to come to our house and shave the stubble off his bleary face with an electric shaver he kept in his shirt pocket. He didn't need a mirror. The planes of his own face were known to him, however his hand shook. That day he put the shaver back. "Come here, Dimples," he said. He fiddled in a little leather purse and then pressed 20 cents into my hand. "Call me when you're 14, he said, and stowed the purse. It was a long time to wait. "It'll cost more than 20 cents by then," I said, but he laughed and walked to the back stoep, where my father was holding a helpless knife and staring at a dead springbok lolling on the table. I wrote the request down in my book, near where my mother had written, "You are not an American beauty. You are not an English rose. You are just a plain old schoolgirl with freckles on your nose." I wrote it all down. How the blonde man hitched up his jeans, his bandy legs rolling as he made his exit, his face smooth and blameless. I listened for the army guys' footfalls past our carriage. Their parade boots were heavy. We'd all seen the boys blushing in church, sitting at the back because there were so many of them, the enormous boots at rest on the tiles, the laces like stitches. You would always be sitting in the row in front of the army boys. The worst thing we could think of was coming on during the family service, the blood blooming, sticky and inevitable, cooling as it spread over the back of your white skirt. There was no way of knowing when it would happen. Each day was another one you'd managed to hold back, a dry day to shore up against the flood of womanhood. Each bloodless day, I told myself that it hadn't happened yet. It might skip me completely.
Thank you. Prop your book up so people can see it there.
Oh.
Thanks. Marina.
The other way. Thank you.
A tiny bit of context. The first paragraph or two is introspective for this young woman that we are meeting, and then we jump into the present when it's happening. She chooses her outfit very carefully. People here dress differently than they do in Potchefstroom. Socials there were in the church hall, well supervised by the dominee and his team of tunnies. The girls would wear pretty dresses and white court shoes, the boys short-sleeved shirts and ties. They would dance the langarm, with no contact between body parts other than the proper placement of hands. No one dared try anything else under the dominees and guards' watchful eyes. After varsity week, Rena had pushed her white court shoes to the back of the cupboard. The wild dancing at the parties here is both intimidating and liberating. It is easier with a couple of drinks in your system, she has discovered. Rena has struggled to make new friends. There are so few Afrikaans girls in Durban. She has met only 2 so far. One girl from Bloemfontein in her accounts class and a perky blonde second-year student who lives up on G floor. The perky blonde invited Rena to her cell group. Cell, as the others refer to it, is what they'd have called Bible study at home. Even religion is done differently here. The cell leaders are all youthful, enthusiastic, evangelical. Rena feels a frisson of excitement at all the change. Her parents did not want her to go to a university so far from home. She had to talk really sweet to convince them that this was the right place for her. Tonight she is meeting the blonde girl at a bar. A bar! Rena finishes putting on her makeup and appraises herself in the mirror with a smile. She looks like she could fit right in. Jump to present. I met my friend. We were sitting at a table. She ordered the wine. A small furrows etched on Rena's brow, lines that weren't there the day before. A decade later, it will be a fixed feature of her face. The bar got so busy. Some other people joined us at the table. My friend's boyfriend and a few others. They were nice, she confesses. We were having fun. I can't remember what happened to my friend. She said there were problems with her Carol. Sorry, my Afrikaans accent is shocking. Carol. En dan was sy net weg. She just wasn't there anymore. I got a bit worried, but the new people were so nice. In her accent, so has 2 syllables. Someone bought drinks. Ek weet nie wie nie. More people joined us, with more and more wine, then shooters. Rena lies back, resting her head against the soft pink cushions. Miskien het ek net te veel gedrink. You think you were just drunk? It's Vanessa who insists on the truth. Vanessa who will not tolerate self-delusion. Rena picks at a loose thread on a cushion. Ja, miskien. She won't look up. The seam on the cushion is coming undone. What about the bruises, the blood? Vanessa is unyielding. What about the way your clothes were put on? There is something truly terrible about a 20-year-old who thinks they know what they're doing.
What I love about those 3 passages, and there were others that I could have picked, but to me, they all speak to the topic of coming of age, but from such different vantage points and from such different ages. And so I wonder how we even define what it means to come of age. You know, the obvious one is, you turn 18 and you've come of age, and then perhaps an even more obvious one would be the physiology of the body and coming of age. But the ones that are explored in your books are much more nuanced than that. It's around the parentification in Moshitadi's case, and then you speak about your initiation.
Oh, yeah.
At a cultural ritual of maturity. Where does childhood end and adulthood begin? And I'm going to ask each of you to maybe talk to us about the moment that you believed as a child. And it might have been a moment, it might have been a single moment, because I think for some of us, it does happen in a single moment. And then for others, a period of time, the moment where you realise that your childhood had ended. I'm going to start with Diane, because she looks like she doesn't, with Marina, because she looks like she doesn't want me to start with her.
I had this knack at school where I would look at the teachers in the face and nod and always be fully engaged with them so that they wouldn't ask me because they knew that they needed to ask someone else. But I obviously lost that technique. Coming of age, it's an interesting question because, and being an older woman now, discussing this issue with friends, and we feel so much younger in our heads, but we're so much older in our bodies. And one of my theories is that somewhere in your late 20s, emotionally, mentally, you kind of reach a plateau, and then so you still see yourself as someone in your 20s, but your body is aging. So that doesn't answer your question at all, but I'm just saying that that is perhaps a time when you are truly adult, wherever that 20-something mark is for you, that's maybe when you've become an adult. But for me, it was probably when I was just past 18 and I had gone to UCT medical school and come from a relatively small town. Maritzburg isn't tiny, but it's certainly not a big metropolis. And put on an aeroplane and sent to UCT alone, being picked up from the airport by someone I didn't know. My stuff had already been shipped down. And going through to res and being completely overwhelmed by this new space, but pretending that everything was okay and that I was on top of it, and being so incredibly homesick, and phoning home every opportunity I got. We didn't have cell phones then. It was in a little call box in the res. And then at some point over the year, I got to a point where I didn't need to phone home anymore. And I think some point the next year, I got to the point where I didn't even need to go home anymore. And I'd say that that's when I felt, okay, I can take care of myself now. That I could stand on my own 2 feet and I didn't need to go straight back to family, straight back to mom to feel like I was solid. I was solid on my own.
Yeah. Was there a feeling prior to that? I mean, I think of me at 18, and we were sort of having this conversation before we started, on me even in my 20s, and just feeling completely ill-equipped to deal with the adulthood that I felt had been assaulted upon me. Was there a feeling that before, up until the age of 18, child, did you feel like a child? Because there's a strange no man's land that exists, isn't there, between very definite childhood and the promise of adulthood. It's like a weird...
Yeah, so I think, to get very personal, I'm speaking about needing to go home to my mother, but actually growing up, coming from a home, a broken home, I'm not even going to say a blended family, a broken home, where it was my mother and my sister and I, and my mother very much had her own issues to deal with and very much had her own life that she was living and trying to make for herself as a single mom. My sister and I did bring ourselves up, so there was a lot of independence from an earlier age. And I guess that transition was definitely blurred, that transition was blurred from being a child that was taken care of, having meals made for you, bags packed for you. You just had to take care of yourself. And I can't really say when that happened, but definitely before high school. By high school, we were already, my mother was the almost sole caretaker. My father was around, but very absent. And if we didn't get picked up from school, we would just have to walk through town, find a bus, and get home. So you take on the role of being older, a lot younger than you probably should, but you just do it because you have to. It's like almost when you're a parent, you don't know what you're doing, but you're there now, so you take on that role and you just run with it because you've got to do it. And so I can't say exactly when. For me, there isn't a moment, but you look back and realize, okay, I was probably adulting a lot earlier than what I needed to.
Yeah, for sure. Diane, for you, what was your moment? What's the age or the moment at which you believed as a child, rather than retrospectively, but that you believed as a child you had cast off childhood and were now entering, or had entered, or were entering adulthood?
Look, I was 3. But I think there are different ways of looking at it.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that we're all talking about is logistically. And so if you define adulthood as taking on responsibility, then yes. But there's also for women sexually, where you're suddenly, as soon as you grow them, somebody wants to pick them. And there's a sense that you are being seen as an adult, even if you yourself are not an adult, somehow available in an adult space that you weren't before, hopefully. But even as a child, I had a very strong sense of wanting to be older. 60 seemed like a really good age where you could do what you wanted. And people would respect you. And I think it's happening. But you also learn to take less shit from people. Like, there are boundaries and there's bad behavior. And some people never cast off childhood. But I think we also, we're conflating childishness with childlikeness. And there is a difference. There's nothing wrong with being a child. There's something wrong with being an adult who's doing childish things. Because you have a responsibility to the herd. And not to damage the herd. Not necessarily to contribute anything amazing, but just not to be a jerk. Just don't be a jerk. Patriarchy. And that sense of, I can't do this, my wife handles this. I've never had to cook for myself. It's lunacy.
That's really interesting, though, in terms of the idea of being an adult who has moments of being childlike, or but the childishness, and that sort of draws us in quite nicely, because the whole thing around generational trauma is being still in child, right? Still in child mode. I'm not owning my motherhood. I'm not parenting. I refuse to parent. I'm passing on a wound that I won't stand in my adult and heal that wound for you, my child. No, I'm not going to answer. I don't know the answer to this question. What the moment for you? Was it when your brother was born? Was it, and the responsibility that was then placed on you? Was it initiation? Was there a moment? Were there moments? What I'm picking up is that there are moments.
Yeah, there is
no
so many moments where that adulthood sort of imposed on me. And I think the moment I realized, my childhood is over, it's when I was given the responsibility of taking care of my brother. And I wrote about it in the book, about how I tried to escape many times. I would try to escape to go play with my friends, and then I'll get severe punishment. And then it happened so many times to a point where I gave up. I was like, it's over for me. At this point, I'm supposed to be playing this role, and I should do it perfectly, because there's consequences if you don't do it perfectly, which cost me a lot of anxiety. But you are right, there's so many moments where that you're an adult now was imposed to me. It was when my brother was born and I had to take care of him, and then having to go to initiation school and getting in there and being taught how to be a woman when I was only 9 years old. And that was normal there were other girls who were my age who were taught these things. You were supposed to carry yourself this way in the world. You're supposed to speak this way. You're supposed to do these things to prove that you're a woman, even though I was basically a child. And I did feel like perhaps I am an adult. So I was in this conflict with how I truly felt as a child and what was expected of me, and having to force myself to reconcile the two, that perhaps I can be an adult, right? If I'm doing these responsibilities perfectly, if I'm following the instruction initiation school, then I am a good adult. And then there was the church as well, where I was sexualized a lot because my boobs came in much earlier, and I was expected to wear, things that got to this point, because then I would, make the guys, or tempt the guys in the church. And that was another way that adulthood was imposed on me, being seen in a sexual way when I was not even there mentally.
Yeah. I did say that at past, I was just going to check in and see if anyone's got any comments or questions at this point. Are they still brewing? Don't let me get to 10-2 and then you'll put your hands up, because we won't have time. Okay. I want to talk about the idea of sort of challenging societal definitions of maturity. Marina, I'm going to come to you. I love that last line that you read about nobody likes a 20-year-old who thinks they know what they're doing. But what else can they possibly be doing? In a way. Thinking back to sort of when I was 20, and in some threads of my life, I was 50. And in other threads of my life, I was 3. It was just this that very strange no man's land. I was 2 years into legal adulthood at university, and yet felt completely ill-equipped to kind of deal with the things that life was throwing at me. And you can't have a conversation either about coming of age without talking about the patriarchy. You can't do it. That is you can't though, can you? It's simply impossible to do that when you look at it particularly through the lens of young women growing up. Everything is rooted in that the male gaze and the male interpretation of what it now means to be going into womanhood and who owns the womanhood. Challenging society's idea of maturity and when we are deemed to be mature and the areas in which we ought to be mature. Your book speaks about these young women who are confronted with a situation. And I look as a 43-year-old woman and I just go, God, they're completely ill-equipped, but they're doing their best, right? And that really speaks, I think you've already mentioned that, you're there doing the best with what you've got. Do you want to talk a little bit about maturity and how you wrote those 3 young women and how they perhaps challenged perceptions of maturity?
Well, the book is divided into 2 parts, and part 1 deals a lot. It follows a dual timeline, set in the present, where there is action happening, and set in 1996, where one of the catalysts for what occurs has taken place. And the line, there's a terrible thing about, I've just lost it now, but there's something terrible about being in your 20s and thinking that you know what you're doing, is said almost as a retrospective, looking back on that from the older woman's perspective, the older woman that we are following later on in the book. Because I look back at my 20s and think, oh, what an arrogant jerk I was at times. My worldview, and we touched on it earlier when we were speaking, my worldview was that I knew what was right and I knew what needed to be done, and I had this terrible attitude that I will tell you the truth, and if you don't like it, change it, because the truth is the truth. If you can't deal with it, then change it. And so that was my arrogant attitude towards things, and that's pretty terrible. There's no compassion there. But yes, you are in this age in your 20s, late teens, early 20s, where you are very self-absorbed. You can't say introspective, because I don't think you are trying to figure out who you are, but you're quite self-absorbed, and you need to go through that, right? You need to go through that to become introspective and to discover who you are. But there's something terrible about it as well, because as an older person, you can look back on that and think, sure, that was selfish. That approach, as we see with the girls, they were trying to do their best, but they actually didn't fix a situation.
Yeah.
They might have made it worse.
Yeah.
So, but we live through that, and we mature, and that's what getting older is all about, is failing and learning and failing and learning, and then finally at the end of the day there might be some success at being an adult, but I don't know, that's not guaranteed either. You know, we just keep on trying and we keep on going.
When you're writing a younger character, a younger version of your character, how much of that is you working through your own stuff in that regard?
Yeah, sure. So the events of the book thankfully didn't happen, but certainly the friendships there, I mean, I have friends here in the audience that are from that era. The friendships there were so lovely for me to reconnect with that sense of finding family with girls in that space, in that varsity space. So yeah, definitely looking back and just re-experiencing those relationships was wonderful for me. Yeah. Even though it's dealing with a horrible trauma, it was really nice to sort of cement those ideas of friendship again.
Diane, I want to talk to you about the vulnerabilities of young women. I bristle when I hear that, the vulnerabilities of young women, because it's depending on how one interprets the term vulnerable, it's almost as if we're these sort of passive victims of the known and the unknown. So how do you interpret vulnerabilities of young women?
With rage, which is the appropriate response. No, women, because of our biology, automatically bear the responsibility of poor decisions. Then zip up and walk away. I mean, all the things, even terrible thing to say. Men, you are lovely. Keep being wonderful. Be kind and loving and generous and unselfish.
Can I interrupt? I just want to interrupt. In Diane's acknowledgements for this book, she says to the patriarchy, thanks for nothing. Which is marvellous.
The thing with rage is that it gets expended, and then you go back to a stage of apathy, and then nothing changes. So you need a slow-burning rage that fuels you until something changes. Women are vulnerable, and they're vulnerable institutionally. That's why, and we have options. Women oppress each other constantly in all sorts of ways. Mothers do terrible things to their daughters. I always wonder if they have regrets at the end, in the guise of trying to make your daughter good and accepted and respected in this community. When, going to your mom at 17 going, was it worth it to have made this neurotic, people-pleasing person? Who knows? I don't know. What do we want out of it? We have to be big picture about it. What do we want out of it? Self-worth and useful contribution to a community that's good. And I think it's also okay to use words like good and bad, because people do good things and they do bad things consciously a lot of the time. But we are all vulnerable, to all sorts of things. And our own actions, absolutely, all the time.
Moshitadi, a lot of the work that you do is around reparenting oneself in the absence of effective, adequate, kind, decent, informed, conscious parenting. in doing the healing work that you've had to do, has that been a coming of age for you, or is that not a
Definitely, definitely. I think as I grow older, it's weird saying that in a panel of women who are much older than me, but
older,
but as I mature, one thing that I am realizing is that I was so stuck as a child that was in need of being cared for, that still needed to be taught how to regulate my own emotions, how to see myself in the world, how to, just even to have confidence in myself. There were so many things that I did not get from my mother that kept me, now that I see it, as a child. Because then I approached every situation from that point of needing my mother, whether it was my friendships, I was parentifying my friends. You're like a sister to me, you're like a mother to me. I was, I was going into these relationships with needing to get something from them because I did not have it in me. And reparenting or self-mothering, what it offered to me was all those things that I needed. And now I can approach these relationships. I'm like, oh, what can I give you, right? Because now I have something to give. So that has been the coming of age for me. I feel like I am I'm becoming my best self. And that is the maturity that self-mothering has offered me.
I was thinking about the genres within the arts or the genre within the arts of coming of age, and how horribly it's romanticized. It's normally along the line. Well, it depends. If the protagonists in the piece of work are male people, they put on some backpacks filled with delicious sandwiches. They go off on a weekend, they find a dead body, they come back and they're men. And that's that, and that's terrible. Stand by me. The body. Or if the people are read as women, you go to a party, get drunk, fall in love with a guy, and then he picks the other girl, and then at the end he ends up with you. And that's it, and you've come of age now, and everything's all right. And it's just like, that's just simply not most of our experience, is it? And I was thinking about my own comings of age. There was no coming of age. There have been pinpoint moments throughout my life. One of them that really stood out for me, and I was only reminded of it when I read your books, was being 13 years old, and it was and walking up our road. I lived in England, and I was walking up the road, and as I drove past, a van drove past with some men in it, and they honked the horn, and it was the first time that had ever happened, and they kind of wolf whistled out the window, and I remember in that moment feeling thrilled and repulsed in and of that moment, and that's such a strange coming of age moment. But there have been others, and as you were talking about mothers and motherhood, also becoming a mother has been a massive
it forces you to,
coming. It suddenly grew me up, as they say. It grew me up. I have to throw now out to questions because it's 1:45, and I'm going to predict what's going to happen here. Yes, right. Okay. Do we have a microphone somewhere? It's up there. Would you rush down to the front and hand the microphone to Helen? Wave, Helen. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. You're all wonderful. I want to try and be slightly solution-oriented or progressively moving forward, because just listening to you, I'm just feeling rage all over again and thinking about how my coming of ages at regular intervals is about how to manage rage, especially when I think of a 14-year-old girl who has to suddenly discover that she is consumable sexual property because the patriarchy won't fucking behave itself. Okay, so that is the rage I've had to deal with. And it's ongoing, and you're quite right. It needs to be slow burn, otherwise it eventually just costs you. So I'm thinking, what is the other side of the coin? And to me, it's nurturing. Because nurturing can be done by somebody of any gender. And what I want you to respond to very briefly, all of you, is what alternative kinds of mothering have you had from non-biological mothers and nurturers and parents? And how has that helped? And can it help?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, for me, I think in the mother wound discussion, I was like, oh, perhaps let's steer away from calling it mothering and just call it nurturing. And you are right, everyone of every gender is able to offer that. So I've had my friends nurture me in very unexpected ways that also taught me how to nurture myself. I was like, oh, you did that for me? Well, thank you. Now I know I can also do that for myself. So I've had my friends do that for me. And I've also had other people who are not really my friends, but I think they had capacity to mother more people. And I just became like another person that they wanted to mother. And that has been healing for me. Because I think because we get wounded in relationships, it helps to also heal in relationships.
It's a very difficult question. Sometimes there are resources involved, like writers' retreats and things like that, where you get to go and be a writer, for example. But for me, it's people that I have a good time with. And that means that it's not transactional. No one's keeping score, but, oh, you've done this for me, so I can do this for you. And that the bantering and the networking is invaluable. Connecting people. Oh, I know an editor who does this kind of work. I'll give you his number, and then we can... so that's that invisible resource network. But also just sitting around, yakking. It's good for the immune system.
Yeah, I think as you grow older, you find a family, don't you? And you find the people that you need to surround yourself with that do make you feel nurtured. And not everyone has that. And you do encounter people as well that try to suck too much out of a relationship. So you don't want to be that person. I can just say for myself that over the years I just became very self-sufficient. So it can be a lonely existence, but you learn to rely on yourself and just make sure that those relationships that you enter into, and that made it possible for me to be selective about the relationships that I entered into, that they would be nurturing and they would be good for me, and to just heal first before you took on the role of parenting, or heal first before you got into a long-term relationship, because if you aren't dealing with your own stuff, then you're going to make wrong decisions perhaps. And so find a partner that brings out the best in you, encourage the friendships that bring out the best in you, and feel confident to move away from the ones that don't. Just protect yourself. And in protecting yourself as a woman, then you can be a good mother, and then you can be a good partner. But you do have to, self-care, I am terrible at self-care because I put everyone else's needs before my own. But I do take time to do what I need to do. And I want to talk a little bit about vulnerability in women, because it's something that I feel quite strongly about, is that we are traditionally seen as the weaker sex, but physically we shouldn't be. That is a role that has been thrust onto women, because in the Victorian era, they thought that you had to be very calm and very quiet and not exercise, and that would make you a good reproducer. And being a good reproducer was the pinnacle of a woman's existence. And so women were discouraged from exercising. Women were discouraged from physical activity. And that is, our bodies are not made for that. Our bodies are made to be strong, and women can be strong. And one of the greatest vulnerabilities women have in this day and age is physical. Sure, it's mental, psychological, but we're still physically vulnerable because we are seen as the weaker sex. And if you start to own your own physical strength and do what you need to do to be strong and to be fit, then you are not going to take a physical assault quite as easily as someone that doesn't believe in their own body's ability. So that is, for me, that's a strong message that I want to get across. In our area, Hillcrest, there's a Hillcrest AIDS Trust, and I was delighted to see that they are offering self-defense courses to young women, even though the threat for most women comes from within their own home. So it's not self-defense to repel an attack from someone on the street, but it's just that knowledge of my body is strong and my body is capable, and I can use my body to say no. It doesn't just have to be my words. And to own the fact that actually you can meet violence with violence. I don't think that that is always out of the question. Meet violence with violence. Absolutely. And that's, I mean, you can read it in the book. She meets violence with violence.
Yeah,
and
does she?
why not? Why not? Why sit back and take it? It's this idea that's all just, if you want to save your life, just lie back and take it. Meet violence with violence. Don't go down scared. Go down angry. That is the point I want to get across. Go down angry. Mic drop.
I think that's really powerful. I think that's a really everything that you would look at if you go online and go young vulnerabilities in young women. Everything speaks to the physicality of women, and it's almost like, and so therefore, you're pretty fucked. And it's like, well, hold on a minute. Thank you. Yes, there is another question there. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for that lovely talk. I was listening and I couldn't help thinking about how deeply personal writing coming-of-age stories must be, even if you're not writing about your own past. I think that, I mean, I've never written a coming-of-age story, but it just seems like it has to be personal on some level. And I was just wondering about remembering one's youth and how it gets infused with like the present and the past and all the bits in between, and how you guys thought about and dealt with what actually happened and memory and how it infused with the stories, and also if it brought any new parts, new knowledge about yourself out through the writing of the books.
That's a lovely question. Thank you.
Oh.
Memory and retrospect and writing.
Oh yeah, because mine is a memoir, there was a lot of remembering involved in that, and it brought up a lot of emotions. But because I do the work of, I call it conscious grieving, and I had to allow myself to deal with the shame, with the anger, with, the guilt, and also the fear that I had as a child. And also I think there was like these beautiful moments that I also found in there about my personality and what I like, and try to infuse that now in, the things that I do and also by writing. So there was the painful pause that I had to deal with and grieve, but there's also the beautiful memories that sort of bloomed out of that are now a fuel for me as an adult. Yeah.
It gets even more complex because once you've written about something, it's kind of crystallized.
Yeah.
And all the alternative memories and you've had around it kind of dissipate.
Right.
So writing it down is also a way of losing it. It's very complicated. And then if you're writing biographical stuff, there are other people who are invested in the narrative, and they will often say to you, "Oh, that didn't happen like this. I was there," and so
Yeah.
And then it's a kind of gaslighting as well, where you're like, "Ooh, am I remembering it right?" It's difficult.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only echo what Diane has said. It's you the boundary between fact and fiction starts to blur, and I find myself telling stories about, do you know what happened in the hospital last week? And I'm like, no, that's what I wrote in my manuscript. That didn't happen at all. Like, forget that. So yeah, fact and fiction does start to blur when you're a fiction writer. Obviously, it's different for memoir, but I think you use your book to work through a few things, and then another one to work through different issues, and maybe finally we'll manage to write about something completely different to ourselves. But it's interesting along the way to delve into these things and to explore our own psyches.
Mindful that we've only got sort of 4 minutes left, I want to wrap up with a question to all of you, which is, if you could talk to your younger self at any one of your comings of age, what would you say to your younger self? I'll start with you, Diane.
Oh, will you?
Yeah.
Will you start
Straight for you, yeah.
I feel quite at peace. I don't feel like I need to go back and do that because the self-talk is quite strong in me. And it's really helpful, guys. Talk to yourselves kindly and go, that was a really difficult thing to do. I'm so proud of you for doing it, and everything is actually going to be okay. I was a feisty little girl, but I was feisty because I had to be, because grown-ups were not being feisty for me. And I'm like proud of her. But I'm not letting that happen to my daughter. So yeah, I feel like my work here is done, really. Take me, Lord!
Teach me before you go, teach me!
Yeah.
Marina.
I think we're a similar age, so I think you do get to a place in your late 40s where you're starting to own your life, and you are, it's okay now. It's okay. And I'd like to tell my younger self, everything's going to be all right. Make the right decisions. You're not always going to make the right decisions. There'll be speed bumps along the way, but generally, if you have internalized a core value system, it's not made out of rock. It's okay. It can change. You can sculpt that still, but it gets better and it gets easier.
Moshitadi.
Yeah, I think around the same thing. I'm just really proud of my younger self. She was so resilient. I mean, she always thought something better is going to come. I'm going to get myself out of this situation. So I'm really, really proud of her. And I feel like we're here because of her, right? Had she gone, oh, life is over, then, everything that has happened right now with the healing work and where I am wouldn't have happened. So I'm really, really proud of my younger self.
Look at that, on time. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists and authors, Moshitadi Lehlomela, whose book, The Girl Who Survived Her Mother, is there, and she'll be available to sign when you've bought the book, to Diane Awerbuck, whose book, latest book, Inside Your Body There Are Flowers, and Marina Auer, Double-Edged. That will also have you doing a sharp intake of breath. Thank you to you. Thank you to you. Strong conversations. Thank you.